building faith together, piece by piece, story by story. Welcome to the Faith in Pieces podcast.
Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to Faith in Pieces, where we build our faith together piece by piece, story by story. Last week, we started this new series, Made Well, that's in partnership with the new sermon series we're doing called Made Well. Last week, we sat down to talk about why our wellness is important both to us and to God. And today, we're going to continue in talking about wellness by talking about spiritual wellness.
Yes, so that is what our focus is today, is on spiritual wellness and understanding that it's not just about how often we read our Bibles or how often we pray. Yes, those things are important, but it's more of a holistic way of engaging in our relationship with God and understanding that when we have a strong spiritual wellness in our relationship with God, when we are going through hard times, when we are sick, our loved ones are sick, we can lean on and find our strength in that relationship with God.
Yeah. And so today, as we talk about spiritual wellness, one of the things we're really excited about with this new series is that we're going to have interviews and have special guests. And today, we had to kick things off with my dear friend Collin Powell, who is the Director of Spiritual Care and Values Integration at the new Houston Methodist Cypress Hospital. And so, Collin, we are so glad that you were here. Thanks for taking some time to sit down and talk with us about spiritual wellness.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So how about you just begin by telling us a little bit about your journey into chaplaincy?
Sure.
Yeah.
So my journey into chaplaincy started when I was about 12 years old. And I didn't realize it was a journey into chaplaincy at that point. My father was an architect, and my father was one of the architects who designed the new Ronald McDonald House building that's on Holcomb. And whenever he got involved in that, the whole family kind of got involved as well. And so he ended up on the board. The rest of the family ended up volunteering there. And so for summers, starting when I was about 12 years old, I would spend a lot of the summers at the Ronald McDonald House volunteering and helping with the kids and helping with some of the things behind the scenes with the office. And really that time there really started me a calling. And I thought initially it was a calling into medicine. Yeah. And so I pursued that medicine track. I went to a school that had a good pre-med program that was thousands of miles away from home. Yeah. And while I was there, I was told to take any major that you want. Pre-med is a concentration, it's not a major. Smart people take like biology or chemistry so they can count it towards both. I took a course in religious studies and actually ended up that becoming my major because I thought, this is great, it's super interesting, and I'll never have another chance to learn about it again. So why not spend way too much of somebody else's money learning about it?
For sure.
And so I ended up graduating from there with an okay pre-med GPA and an okay MCAT score. Neither one of those is ever going to get you into med school straight out of undergrad.
Right.
So I started working as an EMT, and while I was doing that, I also was going to retake some classes because it was encouraged that you do something in the field to show continued interest. Mm-hmm. And I realized very quickly in my time as an EMT that I loved patient care and I hated every other aspect of that job.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife, who's a nurse, was talking with me, and she said, well, you've got this interest in medicine, you've got this religious studies degree, why don't you become a chaplain? Mm-hmm. And it never occurred to me up until that point. And so I had some conversations with chaplains that I'd come to reach out to and meet. I had conversations with our pastor at the time about what it would take to become a chaplain. And so really God opened some doors from there. It was, I think, about 6 weeks after I had that initial conversation that I was in seminary, taking classes through a extension program here in Houston. And then that was really kind of the start of it, just kind of took off. I volunteered at the hospital, volunteered at Methodist Willowbrook, and I just really fell in love with it. It was really affirming. And so went to seminary all in service of becoming a chaplain. And so went to the training program, did a training program for a year at Memorial Hermann down in the Med Center, worked in the trauma units, worked in surgical units, and it was just an amazing experience and really never looked back from there. So after I left Herman, when my residency was over, I got a part-time position at Methodist down in the Med Center. And then within 4 months that had turned into a full-time position. And so I've been with Methodist for about coming up on 7 years now.
Wow, that's awesome.
Huh.
That's awesome.
What does your day-to-day look like as a chaplain in a hospital?
So the day-to-day, it's different now. With the new hospital in Cypress, it's very different than what my day-to-day was at the Med Center. In the Med Center, I was one of 14 chaplains that was there on staff, and we really focused in on specific patient areas and kind of service lines to visit. Now with my new role in Cypress, as that very long and pretentious title mentioned, my focus is not only just on our patients, but also a lot of our staff, including kind of our higher level staff, our executives and our directors who are really working hard to just launch this new hospital and really build out this amazing new venture that we've got an opportunity to do. So I spend about half my day doing staff care, rounding on nurses, PCAs, directors, managers, executives, just seeing how the stresses of the day are going with them, how we can be supporting them through their own journeys, recognizing that our staff bring in burdens that we don't get to see every single day. And then within that, the other half of the day is spent with patients, visiting with patients kind of for specific consults or just making the rounds to the ER and checking in and seeing how people are doing as their life has been interrupted and they've been brought to us to deal with some kind of situation. So the day is spent in support, half of it with staff, half of it with patients.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I never would have thought that it would be like 50-50 with like staff, but that is like so important to think about the people who are caring for these people, having somebody who cares for their well-being and their spiritual wellness too at the same time. That's really great.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm married to a nurse, and so I get to see all of the things that she brings home.
Yeah,
and we're just recognizing that there's a lot of that secondary stress that people kind of bring home. We call it bringing your patients home with you.
Yeah.
So a lot of our nurses and our PCAs and our housekeepers, food and nutrition, all these people, they become so deeply connected with our patients, and a lot of times they do bring them home.
And they feel it too. Like they're walking that journey with their families and their patients too. It's hard.
It's true. And in the community hospital, we actually are seeing more and more of kind of the same patients over and over again, because that is, for a lot of our patients, that's the only healthcare they get, is they able to come into a hospital. And so we see these people through long journeys.
Yeah. So we're really glad that you're here today to talk about spiritual wellness. And we just talked about on Sunday with spiritual wellness some things, but we also want to hear your perspective on this. So like when you hear the phrase spiritual wellness, like what comes to your mind initially within that?
So I think one of the things that we work on as chaplains is we work on focusing on the spirituality of people. And spirituality is not religion. Spirituality is kind of a bigger umbrella that religion falls underneath.
Right.
Spirituality is anything that connects us to something bigger than ourselves. That could be walks in nature. That could be spending time with friends and family. It can absolutely be religion, kind of that formalized structure for spirituality. But I was at a concert on Monday and being surrounded by people that have the same interest, singing the same songs. It was a very spiritual experience because it made me feel very connected to all these other strangers that we had nothing in common other than our love for this one band.
Yeah.
So.
Well, if you don't, before we go any further, what was the concert? I have to know.
Sure. So it was Coheed and Cambria.
Oh, nice. Yes.
Yeah. Coheed and Cambria, it's my favorite band. This is the 21st time I've seen them live.
Oh,
okay.
Wow.
And they were also with Taking Back Sunday. So
for
any 2000s.
I was about to say, that brings me back to like being, for me, that was like a sophomore in high school.
Yeah, any early 2000 emo kids.
Okay.
We all latch on. You don't latch on to that?
No, I was finished close to.
Well, we can work on I'm talking about latching onto like the emo, you ever went through like an emo?
No.
I fall back into it. It's not a phase, That's
Is
what
that
we used to say. No, I think I'm really glad you brought that up I think that concert metaphor is really, really strong there, of people who gather together and there's something that's happening that it's hard to describe, but there is that sense of like connectedness that happens within that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think for us, what we were trying to do is foster that spiritual health and spiritual wellness is making sure that people do feel supported in whatever expression it is that they do. I mean, we as chaplains have our own religious backgrounds, but we're not just there for Christian, Methodist, Catholic, Buddhist, whatever our own denomination happens to be, or our faith expression. We recognize that everybody in that hospital, whether they have a specific expression of faith or not has some kind of spirituality that we can try to foster.
Absolutely. So to you, how is spiritual wellness different from, or is it connected to mental wellness and physical wellness?
Yeah, I think they are deeply connected. Actually, there's been studies that have been done. There's one of the Journal of Pain Management. There was a study done with cancer patients, and they looked at the cancer patients and looked at those who had kind of deep spirituality, or they expressed high levels of religiosity. And they found that in patients that had higher levels of religiosity or religious connection, they experienced less spiritual pain. So spiritual pain being that deep existential pain that you can't tie to anything physical. Those patients that had a strong spiritual life experienced less spiritual pain, and the patients that had less spiritual pain actually scored lower on pain scales for physical pain as well. So we do see that connection where that spirituality can kind of help lower stress and help lower anxiety and give those connection points where people can feel cared for and feel more deeply connected to one another and to their communities. And once they have that, we actually see that it proves to have better health outcomes.
So, in your experience of, you've been working in a hospital, for 7-8 years, or at least in like the Methodist system, like when you meet with a patient or you meet with staff, like what are some signs that you see when you feel that someone is spiritually well?
Sure.
Like even in the midst of suffering that they may be going through, like what are the signs that you see?
I think there tends to be just a general kind of pervasive, not even necessarily peace, but kind of a contentment. An idea that wherever I am, in whatever situation it brings me, I can still feel the pains and the aches and the sorrows of a particular situation, but I can do so knowing that there's something else beyond this particular moment. So the patients who can express to me that even in the midst of grief or pain or loss, that they feel still some kind of love, some kind of connection, some kind of gratitude to the world around them, in whatever expression that may be. That for us really feels like somebody who has a strong spirituality and a strong spiritual wellness that we want to foster as best we can, and kind of just what we do as chaplains is not ever kind of give patients spirituality. It's find what the patients have within themselves and help them rediscover or tap into the resources they already have.
Yeah. It's not like giving it to them per se of like, here's your prescription, but understanding where somebody is, like I love the way you said, like giving them the resources they have for themselves. That's awesome. Yeah.
One of the things that we learned really quickly in our training was, maybe you're going to encounter patients that have all kinds of different ideas and spiritualities and structures within themselves. Don't tear that down unless you're going to be there to rebuild something better.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you don't have the time to be there to do that.
No, I mean, most of the patients that we see, I see once, twice.
Yeah.
And then
they're gone.
Yeah. And I think like when we think about that within like local parish ministry too, and we think about, moving different churches, like what happens whenever you're gone too, right? Like if you're walking along somebody and like you're giving them that prescription consistently without letting them look at the resources themselves, what happens after you leave?
When you leave, like they can't build it back up. They just crash, and they don't have a way to keep
to sustain.
That's the word I couldn't think of it.
That's okay.
No, like that's exactly right. And on the flip side of that, what misconceptions have you seen or experienced that people have about spiritual wellness in terms of illness?
Yeah, I think one of the things that it's kind of the sticking point for me, that again, you don't want to tear down anybody's belief structure, but the people who say, well, I shouldn't complain, or I shouldn't feel bad, or I shouldn't ask God what's going on. God's big enough to handle our questions.
Right.
God's big enough to handle our doubts. I think it's an honest expression of where we are as people to bring our questions to God and say, why is this happening? Why in this moment? I think you read through the book of Job, and Job is kind of held up as this pinnacle of faith and endurance. But what Job is doing the entire book is asking God for answers, saying, I have done all the things I'm supposed to do. why has this happened to me? And then even within the midst of that saying, but still I will praise you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think even when we look at like the Psalms too, there's a lot of that. There are these Psalms of like triumphant joy and excitement about what God is doing, and then there are these other ones that just ask questions of God and voice frustration. But those are never like healed at the end of that Psalm, right? We just move on to the next one.
Right.
Yeah, and just giving speed. I love that you tied Job into that too. I think that's really, really deep and accurate for who we are as Christians too.
Yeah, and I think it just letting them, like you said, helping them understand in whatever way you can with what they believe, and you want them. Again, you have such this finite time in that room, and I know it. But if in that one little bit of time, what would you want to say to someone who says that to you? Like,
yeah, I think that again, just the idea that God can handle it.
okay.
That there is a place, and we even see it within the canon. There's a place for lamentation. Right? There's a place to say, this is wrong, and I'm not content with what this is and the way the world is at this moment, but still within all of that saying, but I know that even in this moment of pain, that God is still with me.
Yeah.
So encouraging people to have those earnest and honest conversations with themselves and with God.
Yeah.
Just knowing that there shouldn't be a guilt attached to this idea that I can't question God.
Yeah.
So God's fine.
Yeah.
But God is not diminished by your questions.
Right. Yeah, so like as we continue to talk about kind of like resourcing in the midst of all this, are there any like particular like practices or prayers or conversations that you lean on to help people experience that spiritual wellness? Like, are there like common refrains that you ever use within your ministry that have been helpful?
I think one of the things that I always come back to is this idea of connection and relationship. I think that, and it's expressed in a lot of different faiths, but you see it expressed in Christianity, just even this idea that God is always in relationship, that God exists in relationship as the Trinity, as God in relationship with creation, that what is it that we are doing to foster relationship and connection? And so those practices for me are what is a practice that makes you feel connected? Where is it that you find joy and peace and safety? So we do a lot of guided imagery and guided meditations with patients. And one of the things that I always go to is where in your life did you most feel safe?
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's childhood.
Right.
That love of a parent or a grandparent or some trusted individual. Where is it that you found that connection and that safety? And now take that idea and expand that out. Now, how would you imagine God's peace, protection, love to feel if this is the moment that you feel most safe? Just encouraging that exploration and really that idea of just deep connection with one another, deep connection with the divine, deep connection with whatever it is around you that gives you life and gives you joy.
Yeah, I think you talked a lot about like people having the resources and you helping unlock that. And I love that strategy of like going back to a time in which you felt connected and remembering the emotions, like remembering the senses even around you within that, because that can unlock something in folks, 30, 40 years down the road of where they are. Yeah, that's great.
And sometimes it's kind of that, it's a much more immediate, intimate of how do you feel about your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, nephews, spouse? How do you feel about those people? And using that as an expression of God's love towards you, right? Where even in moments where you feel, disappointed or let down, that you never stop that love.
Yeah.
And so we have people that deal, as you're wrestling with questions of mortality, oftentimes you do wrestle with guilt.
Yeah.
And so walking with people through that guilt of whatever you may have done, the people that love you are really forgiving and accepting, and that forgiveness and acceptance is a reflection, even a pale reflection of God's love and acceptance and forgiveness towards us.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And that guilt you find a lot in those who have been given a terminal diagnosis or are the ones who are in the hospital actively dying. It's like that guilt, they just can't let go of it. And they're holding on, like with the tightest fist, they have held on to that.
I think a lot of times what we kind of start to have to dig a little bit, where there are some people that feel really guilty, and then there's some people that kind of lash out in anger about, lash out in anger at God or at the people around them. And what you start to realize when you walk with them through this is anger is usually just fear coming out sideways. And so fear of death, fear of the unknown, of what's beyond this, fear of our own mortality, helping patients to sit in those emotions and not lash out at them, not be angry at them, but accept that this is the place where we are. This is the place where we are all going.
Right.
How can we go into this with a sense of, again, spiritual wellness? How can you go into this where you feel that connection in that relationship, where there can be some fear, absolutely. But what do you do with that fear, and where do you turn to that fear when there's nothing that you recognize you can do with it yourself?
Yeah.
When you are sitting with families who are going through hope and or grief, what care do you provide for them? How do you walk with them through that?
I think it's a balancing act, but not necessarily because hope and grief are disconnected. I think it's a balancing act of how can you keep them both together. I think everybody's experiencing grief. My firm belief is that every patient that I encounter is dealing with grief in some way, and then kind of extrapolating past that, every person that we deal with in life is dealing with some kind of grief. Grief is not a response to death. Grief is a response to loss.
Right.
And we've all lost something.
Yeah.
We have loss of autonomy, loss of dreams, loss of hopes, loss of independence that you see, especially in the hospital.
Right.
Patients that are angry about, I had all these plans and now they've been taken away from me. I used to be able to do all these things and now I can't because of this illness. That loss, I think, is something that if we recognize it, that all of us are dealing with, then it helps us to really navigate it a little bit easier. That there are patients that are dealing with deep grief, of course, but we're in some sense are all dealing with a level of grief. But we all deal with that, hopefully, with something to look forward to. What is it on the other side of this? You have dealt with this grief for months, years at this point. What is it that keeps you going? So with our patients and our families that are in the midst of grief and also wrestling with hope, fostering the hope while also recognizing that grief is a natural response to life.
Yeah.
I brought it with me because it's a poem that I really love. It's a coworker asked me if I'm still sad by Brenna Toohey, and the poem goes this way. It says, a coworker asked me if I'm still sad, and I tell her grief is not a feeling but a neighborhood. This is where I come from. Everyone I still love lives here. Someday I hope to raise a family in a place you could not mistake for any home I've ever been in. Brenna, she says, there's no such thing as an unhaunted house. I think all of us throughout the day, as we are going through our lives, are encountering each other as unhaunted houses. There's no such thing as that unhaunted. We're all haunted houses.
Yeah.
We're all dealing with something. We're all carrying ghosts of something with us. But I think that recognition that once you recognize we are all doing it, then that gives you a little bit of, you've been here too.
Yeah.
We can get through this together.
The power of connection.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned, and one of the things that I was taught by Cindy, my chaplain mentor, was to ask what their first name was and then to call them by their first name, because the second they arrived in the hospital, they were not called by their first name. They were referred to as Mr. or Mrs. And especially for the patients who've been there for more than a couple of days, like they've lost their identity. They've just become a number, they've become a patient, they've become a last name. And kind of the hope that comes back when their name is spoken to them. And there was a lot of power and hope when you give them something back that they lost.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful practice.
Yeah.
One of my frustrations that I've seen just within the general healthcare system is not only that people lose that first name, is when they just become a case number.
Yeah.
What's your medical record number? What's your MRN? And once you become an MRN, that's just incredibly dehumanizing.
Yeah, when I would have I would ask for patient information and I'd get it in more, and I was like, that does not help me.
Mhm.
That is not what I need. It's not going to give me any information to walk into that patient's room.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about like how you provide or help cultivate and give people resourcing for their own spiritual wellnesses within your position. But I think too, one of the questions I'd love to ask you is, I'm sure there are days where you come home from the office where you're feeling like incredibly rejuvenated spiritually by something that you saw, a conversation that you had, an experience that you had. But I'm sure there are also days where you come home feeling beaten and battered by whatever that day is held. And so, like, how do you tend to your own spiritual wellness in the midst of such a heavy vocation?
Sure. I think
Besides, like, just jam out to Coheating, right? Like, we know that already.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that helps just me in particular, I that recognition that I had early on of somebody's got this, that I don't have to carry it with me. There were, we talked about bringing patients home. I think one of the things that I had to recognize early on was when I leave the hospital, God is still there. That God is still with them, still caring for them, loving them, supporting them in the midst of whatever it is they're dealing with. And if they've got God with them, I'm just a bonus.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not adding anything additional that God wouldn't already have ready for them.
Yeah.
So yes, there are hard days, certainly. But I think knowing that when I walk away, that patient is still going to be there in some capacity, right? That patient is still with somebody who can love and care for them, that God is still with them. And I think then just tending to my own spirituality of finding that connection. So for me, just personally, it's spending time with my wife and with my kids and music, of course. But baseball, my children are obsessed with baseball. And so getting to come home and on a day where I may have, I've held somebody's hand while they were dying, or if I've prayed over somebody who was taking their last breath, and then come home and my son, rushing up to me and going, "Dad, look at this home run that Alvarez hit last night." So it's going to be okay.
Yeah. I like what you said, that when you leave the hospital, God's still there. And I think that's a good reminder for everyone, but I mean for pastors too. That's a good.
I think it takes a lot of humility to say that out loud and truly believe it.
Absolutely.
Right? Of
absolutely.
like recognizing I get to be an instrument of God when I am here.
Right.
But when I leave, that doesn't mean that since I'm gone as an instrument that there's not another one here, or that God's presence is gone.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
I think that one of the things that I'm sure as pastors you may have heard the story about when did you become an atheist? Where somebody was saying, this is my schedule, I have to do this is the church, then this is the church, and then after that I've got to run home for 15 minutes and eat and come back and I've got to do all these things. And they asked, when did you become an atheist? When did you stop trusting that God has it? So I think functional atheism is a problem that I think all of us deal with in some way. And then being able to hand that back over and say, not only do I not have this, I never had this. God was always in control of this.
And then I think when we think about like spiritual wellness journeys, both like inside and outside of the hospital, I think something that, especially I think just like in American culture, it's so easy to overlook it with how like much we jam pack our schedules. But the practice of Sabbath, right? And like and keeping Sabbath and truly valuing it. And Sabbath not having to be something like where you sit on your couch and you don't do anything, right? Like for some people that may be Sabbath, is like having that time of truly like physically resting, mentally resting, and having no outside distractions. But like for me, Sabbath is like going and on a walk outside in the morning when it's still cool outside. Sabbath can be like going and playing pickleball with my wife. Sabbath can be for me like baseball and just being able to sit and think about the game and not think about anything else and just celebrate the fact that this game exists and it brings me joy, right? I mean, not this season because I'm a Braves fan, so nothing has brought me joy, but I think like that is such an important practice for all of us as people of God, is to spend time taking joy in the presence of God. And even if it's not like a full day, like carving out a couple of hours at first to like, this is my time to celebrate and to rest in who God is and who God has made me to be. That gives us that spiritual like centeredness that then allows the rest of the week for us to be able to see God's presence, I think, more in our lives because we've participated in it.
I think what's just one of the things that always struck me, and I think I had a professor point this out to me once in seminary, was that keeping the Sabbath is one of the commandments.
Right.
And we are given no indication that it's any less important than the commandments not to lie or to
Right.
or to.
Yeah, it's not like do this, it's above everything else.
Yeah.
So, and I know my Sabbath people, I can understand. I will get up at 4 a.m. and I will run. And
Yeah, that's not Sabbath for me, but I appreciate it.
no, I was watching
No, it's okay.
baseball.
Is it Sabbath or psychopathy?
It could be both. But I'll get up and run because I don't have any responsibilities.
Yeah.
There's no one else around. I can just put my headphones on. I'll either listen to an audiobook or,
Coheed and Cambria.
I have no idea who that is.
Well, you may have to check it out.
I might have to, but my husband calls it the rage music of the 90s. And I'll just run.
Yeah.
And it clears my head.
Yeah.
It makes physically I feel better. And then I come into the house and get ready for the day. And it's like it almost resets me. Like, okay, I can just step into whatever's going to happen today. Because I'm like you, I can't just sit and rest.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I have to just be totally at the end of my tether to be able to do that. So I do things, but they're things that bring me joy. I run, I read a book, I do something like that.
And I think like the difference in how we all see Sabbath around the table of like what allows us to take joy in the presence of God.
Yeah.
The fact that we all have different things, I think like sheds itself more into the light of like God has created each of us uniquely, wonderfully, and fearfully made.
Mm-hmm.
And God is so big that God can take all the different ways that we experience joy in God and ratify that like, yes, this is how you take Sabbath individually. Like it would be so lame if we all took Sabbath the same way, right? If if we all saw Sabbath as like sit on your couch for an entire day and don't move, like that sounds awful.
Yeah.
But like finding and I think encouraging people to see like where do you see the joy of God in everyday life and live into that just even for a couple of hours at first and then maybe work your way up to an entire day.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Collin, as we start to kind of wrap up our time together, if someone listening like wants to take a step towards greater spiritual wellness, like if they recognize this is an area in my life where I don't know where to start, like what is the one practice or posture that you would recommend for them?
So I'm going to throw it back at you. There's probably actually two.
Yeah.
What I would say is find something that you can do for yourself, right? That Sabbath, whatever it happens to be. And then find something you can do for others. It's that there's a quote by Martin Luther King that says, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? So find what it is that you can do for others, because it's in that service and in that connection that we actually start to get a little bit out of our own heads and out of our own kind of malaise of just the weight of the day. Whatever it is that you can find to connect yourself with others, do that, but also still find that Sabbath, that moment of what it is you do to feel yourself in solitude. Have a practice for solitude, have a practice for connection. And doing both of those, I think, is what will lead to greater spiritual wellness.
Yeah, that's great.
It's kind of like, love the Lord your God.
I was thinking that.
And love your neighbor as yourself. Like to do one, the other has to be included. Like you can't find. You
can't love God without neighbor.
Without neighbor without God. So, what encouragement would you give to someone who is struggling with faith in the midst of illness or a really difficult time?
I would just encourage that you're not alone in it. That you are not the only person who's gone through this. There are people who have been through it as well. Who it doesn't have to be necessarily a chaplain. It could be you talk to your neighbor or somebody that sits next to you at church that maybe you haven't spoken to before, and you're talking about, well, I've got this struggle with my I've got a cancer diagnosis. Well, maybe somebody around you also has that same or has a loved one who's gone through it who can walk that path with you. Yeah. So what I would encourage is, if you are struggling with spiritual wellness in the midst of illness, that you're not the only one who's done it. That we've all kind of walk this path, and again, find that way of connection. Allow yourself to be filled and to be vulnerable with the people around you, so that we have those moments of greater and deeper connection. One of the things that I think it's probably one of the most remarkable interviews I ever saw. It's an interview between Stephen Colbert and Anderson Cooper.
Yeah.
Dude, oh my gosh.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's just, there's this beautiful moment where Colbert is talking with Anderson Cooper, and it's so shortly after Cooper's lost his own mom.
Yeah.
His mom had just died months ago. And Colbert starts to talk about this connection where he has a grief of losing a parent.
Yeah.
Colbert's father died when he was very young in a plane crash. And you see this really deep, intimate moment of connection where it's Colbert saying that I'm not grateful for suffering, but in the midst of suffering, I find that now, because I've suffered, I can connect with others who have suffered as well. And then Colbert takes that a step further and says, and that's the point of the incarnation.
Yeah.
That God steps into humanity and suffers the same way we do. And so in that suffering, God is connected with us, and we are connected with one another.
Yeah. That interview, the first time that I watched it, absolutely wrecked me. It's
So
so good.
good.
Yeah, just search if you're listening to this or watching this, like Stephen Colbert and Anderson Cooper, just Google it. It'll come up.
He's
It's
given
so good.
another one, and I don't remember who it was with, but it was on his faith again, and you're just sitting there, and you're just blown away because the interview's going the way a Stephen Colbert interview goes, and then just bam, he just drops and you're just. Oh
Yeah,
my
those
gosh.
people from South Carolina, they really know what they're talking about. So, Collin, this has been a joy to be able to sit down and talk. I know for me, when I think about like what I'm taking away from this conversation, the poem that you read and like just the ending of like there are no unhaunted houses, I think for me is really going to linger, of reminding me that no matter what I'm going through, it's not like everyone around me is doing perfectly and I am at the bottom, but just being able to recognize like we all go through these seasons together. But in the midst of that, that's why connection is so important, that we can lean on each other. So I really appreciate those words. Those were great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really resonated with when I leave, God stays. You know, I've been, is it 6 weeks now?
I have no idea. Joel asked me when we moved to the new office today. And I was like 4 years ago.
I don't know. But around 6 weeks. But then I came from an appointment that I was at for 7 years as clergy, but I had been there for like 11 before that. And I was leaving a lot of relationships, but also a lot of congregants who I had been walking through sick, illness, death, and I had to leave. I had to just say this is part of who we are as United Methodist pastors. Is when the cabinet calls, you go, but yours was the reminder that God stayed, I left, and I mean I don't regret leaving, but it's still hard with those relationships, but God stayed, and I don't have to be there to take care of things because God was there before I got there, and God's obviously there still. So it's a good reminder.
I've taken a lot of comfort in the recognition that I'm not big enough to mess up God's
Right.
plans.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, if you watch Hot Ones at the end of every episode, they do that. Sean does the whole like roll out the red carpet for you and like this camera. We only have 2 cameras. But tell us if there's anything going on coming up at Houston Methodist Cypress Hospital, anything you want to talk about that you're excited about, or any ways that we can plug in as members of Mosaic.
So what I would say is Methodist Cypress, we're kind of launching this new place where we want this to be a place for community as well. That we have the hospital, yes, the hospital's there on campus, but we also do have communities like sports fields and community events that happen at the hospital, where it's not just a place where you go when you're sick, where it can actually be a gathering place for any events that you've got going on. So what I would encourage you is the campus itself is open. We've got sports fields, we've got kind of a walking trail out there that we're building. We've got all these different places that you can connect with that make use of the campus, but also if you're looking for ways to connect with the hospital kind of in a direct way, if anything I've said kind of spurs you to think about maybe spiritual chaplaincy, spiritual care is kind of something that I am interested in, reach out. We have volunteers that volunteer with us, that visit patients and that check in, and our staff as well. We have groups that provide care packages to our particular units. If you feel kind of called to serve those who serve, we can work with you about adopting a unit to kind of support our frontline staff that are dealing with all the just different stresses that the day brings. So we are there, and hopefully we don't see you as a patient.
Yeah.
But if you do come in as a patient, just know that you'll be cared for, that you'll be loved, that you have all the support for your physical, emotional, spiritual health that you need.
Awesome. Well, Collin, man, we really appreciate it. Thank you for your wisdom, your presence in this conversation. It was a joy. So, do you want to introduce our next episode, or just give a little teaser?
So next week we will be focusing on mental wellness and understanding the importance of just recognizing your mental health as something that is vital for your well-being, for all of your well-beings, but also talking about normalizing that it's okay to ask for help, that it's okay to seek out help. Whether it's at the very beginning when you start to feel like maybe something's coming up inside of you and you need someone to talk to, or if you've been struggling for a while asking for help, there's no shame in that. And so we're going to be talking about that next week. And so we hope that you join us then.
Yeah. So as always, like, follow, subscribe on Faith in Pieces. We are so glad to be able to do this and glad for this conversation, and we'll see you next week.